June 1977. Britain was still licking its wounds from the three-day week. Beige was considered a bold fashion choice, and cars, well, cars were more necessity than thrill. But on this night, something curious flickered onto British television screens. A new motoring program called Top Gear. No theme music, no roaring V8s, just a presenter in a beige jacket, standing next to a beige car in front of a beige background. And yet, somehow, it worked. Top Gear wasn't about speed. It wasn't about glamour. It was about cars that real people actually drove. If you were hoping for Ferraris, Lamborghinis, or the sound of tortured tires, tough luck. This was the real world, where insurance premiums were terrifying, fuel economy was religion, and excitement came with wheel trims. Episode 3 took us on a curious detour through West Germany, France, and Czechoslovakia. 3 countries, 3 completely different approaches to what a car should be. First, the Volkswagen Derby, a Polo with a boot, the kind of car you bought if you fancied being an accountant but didn't quite qualify. Then we've got a French hatchback that practically invented the city car, the Peugeot 104, light as a paperclip and twice as useful. And finally, from the heart of the Eastern Bloc, the Škoda 110R Coupé, a car that wanted to be a Porsche but ended up somewhere between a lunchbox and a washing machine. With rear-wheel drive. This isn't some glossy supercar fantasy. This is budget realism, and somehow, it's charming. Welcome to Four Wheels and Fuel, the show that takes you back to when cars were slow, honest, and covered in corduroy. Buckle up, there's no turning back. Volkswagen Derby. Let's begin with a car that's so sensible it makes a Volvo look like a rock star. Enter the Volkswagen Derby. Launched in 1977, the Derby was essentially a Volkswagen Polo with a boot. That's it. VW took the perky little Polo, tacked on a saloon rear end, and created what might be the most German solution to a non-existent problem. What if someone wants less practicality and more boot? It was Volkswagen's answer to buyers who still felt suspicious of hatchbacks. People who believed a car should look like a car. 3 boxes, squared edges, and room for the dog, and a week's worth of potatoes. And to be fair, in the conservative corners of Europe, the Derby made sense. Under the bonnet, you'd find a 1.1 or 1.3-liter inline-4, both mounted transversely and driving the front wheels. No power steering, no frills, no thrills. Just an engine, a clutch, and a will to keep going until the heat death of the universe. Performance? Modest, style, reserved. But the Derby was built with a kind of unpretentious confidence. It didn't need to impress you. It just worked. And surprisingly, it worked rather well. The Derby drove tidily. The gear change was light. The suspension soaked up potholes like a thirsty camel. And it had a slightly upmarket air compared to its Polo sibling. Maybe it was the chrome, maybe it was the illusion of a boot, but it felt a smidge more grown up. Top Gear didn't go overboard in their coverage, but they did recognize it as a practical, no-nonsense daily driver, which, in 1977, was more useful than any Countach poster. Interestingly, the Derby had staying power. It sold well enough to spawn multiple updates and continued on into the 80s before being absorbed back into the Polo range. Say Yacht even built their own version in Spain. Same car, sunnier attitude. The Derby was never exciting, but it was honest. A kind of 4-wheeled cardigan, warm, predictable, and a bit dull, but you'd miss it if it disappeared. And in a decade that brought us the Allegro and the Marina, that's already a victory.
Oui, j'ai compris. Une 104 Peugeot.
La nouvelle, chef.
Alors elle bouge pas de là. Vous la gardez.
Oui, chef.
Les nouvelles 104 Peugeot. Une 5 chevaux qui roule à l'essence ordinaire et 2 6 chevaux. Elles ont 5 portes, 5 places et 4 vitesses au plancher.
Peugeot 104. Right, the Peugeot 104. The car that asked, what if your shopping trolley had 4 doors and a charming little engine? In a world obsessed with size and chrome, the 104 walked in like a French waiter, compact, efficient, and utterly uninterested in your Ford Cortina. Launched in 1972, the 104 was one of the smallest 4-door cars in the world, yet it somehow had room for a family, their dog, and half a baguette factory. Peugeot weren't just being quirky, they were making France's first proper super mini, and it arrived just in time for the mid-70s fuel crisis. Under the bonnet, a 954cc engine, co-developed with Renault, humming out 45 horsepower. Yes, that's the same as a modern lawnmower, but in this featherweight tin box, it actually felt lively. Like a wasp in a jam jar, it didn't roar, it buzzed. And it buzzed through cities with shocking ease. Tight corners, no problem. Parallel parking, done before your disco track finished. And here's the kicker. Front-wheel drive with a transverse engine. It doesn't sound revolutionary today, but back then, that layout was the kind of smart packaging that made British designers quietly weep into their pints. Inside, the 104 was peak minimalist chic. Thin seats, a dash with fewer dials than a microwave, and plastics that felt like they'd melt in a hot breeze. But it was cheap, it was functional, and in France, it sold millions. Peugeot even spun it into coupés, 5 doors, and later the 104 ZS, which was sporty. Or at least it wore sporty clothes. In Episode 3, Top Gear treated it as the sensible revolution it was. Not thrilling, not glamorous, but damn clever. It was a car that let normal people escape bus stops without bankrupting themselves. And while nobody pinned 104 posters on their wall, this little cube quietly laid the foundation for future icons. The 205, the Clio, the Fiesta. It proved that a car didn't have to be big to be important. The 104 didn't want to change the world. It just wanted to get you to work, on time, with enough money left over for wine. And honestly, that's still a revolution worth applauding.
Před časem se objevila na našich ulicích a silnicích novinka tuzemského původu. Je to sportovní kupé Škoda R110 pro náročné jezdce. Má slušivou, i když nijak šokující siluetu. AZNP Kvasiny je vyrábějí nikoli jako svůj jediný program. Přitom je o kupé velký zájem v zahraničí. A tak není divu, že na domácím trhu se R110 objevuje jako šafrán. Pro naše náročné automobilové fanoušky je ovšem rychlý sportovní vůz jen polovinou její.
Škoda 110R Coupé. And now we go east, way east, to Czechoslovakia, land of brutalist architecture, mushroom soup, and surprisingly cheeky coupés. This is the Škoda 110R Coupé, and before you scoff, yes, it's sporty. Sort of. Maybe, if you're generous. Introduced in 1970, the 110R was based on Škoda's humdrum 100 saloon, but given a radical makeover. Swoopy roofline, frameless doors, and rear-wheel drive. And that engine? A 1.1-liter inline-4, mounted in the back, air-cooled, and buzzing out a thrilling 52 horsepower. That's right, not fast, but definitely trying. It was the Eastern Bloc's version of a dream car. If you were a young Czech lad with posters of the Porsche 911 on your wall, the 110R was probably the closest you were going to get. And you know what? That wasn't a bad thing. The 110R wasn't just a pretty face. It had poise. With its light rear end and rear-mounted engine, it handled with a sort of nervous eagerness. Lift off mid-corner and you might find the rear swinging wide, a dance more familiar to Stuttgart than Škoda. But in the hands of someone brave or just foolish, it could be genuinely fun. The styling was tidy, angular, purposeful, chrome accents, even a sporty little dashboard with a rev counter, rare in cars from the Eastern Bloc. It looked like a car someone cared about. And here's the kicker. This humble 110R was the foundation for one of Škoda's most important cars, the 130 RS, a lightweight rally weapon that beat Western rivals across Europe's most dangerous tarmac stages, built on 110R bones. Now that's pedigree. Top Gear didn't feature it prominently. It was a bit obscure in the UK, but across Eastern Europe, the 110R was a legend. The kind of car that made people stare at dealership windows and daydream, even if they were queuing for bread at the same time. It wasn't perfect, but it had soul. And in 1977, soul counted for a lot. So while the West had Capri and Cortinas, the East had this, a two-door wedge of hope with a rear engine and a rebel streak. So there you have it, a German saloon with a bonus boot, a French little hatchback, and a Czech coupé with Porsche daydreams. Together they weren't fast, they weren't flashy, but they told the story of 1977. Practical, proud, and just a little bit peculiar. Was this your first car? Or your dad's, your mom's, your uncle's? Let us know. We'd love to hear your story. Next time on Four Wheels and Fuel, we crank the ignition on three titans of opposite worlds. The Lada 1200, forged in Soviet steel and spite, the Trabant 601, made mostly of recycled hope and pressed wool, and the Ford Escort Mk2, Britain's blue-collar hero with a rallying soul. It's capitalism versus communism, fiberglass versus function, and a horsepower figure so low it might actually be a rounding error. Until then, polish your wheel trim, don't trust rear drum brakes. And for the love of torque, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Or we'll make you drive an Austin princess.